Wood Brothers have always been good. From Bowman Gray Stadium in the Appalachian foothills to the Indianapolis 500, to their best remembered days breaking records on the NASCAR Superspeedway Trail with the Silver Fox, David Pearson, they've created great moments and great race car drivers. But most importantly, they've maintained a country-style sense of dignity and a respect that has survived over 30 years in motorsports. Hello, everyone. I'm Dave Bowman. 30 years ago this week, the Wood Brothers won their first Superspeedway race here at Charlotte Motor Speedway. Since then, they've refined pit stops into an art form and collected a record number of Superspeedway victories. Join me today as we meet the Wood Brothers on this episode of Hidden Heroes.
This episode of Hidden Heroes is brought to you by Fram Filters, Bendix Brakes, and Autolite spark plugs and wiring cables, which are all quality products of Allied Signal.
If you've lived as long as NASCAR legends Glenn and Leonard Wood, traveled as far and seen as much, chances are irony becomes a part of the baggage. This, in the late stages of their fourth decade of NASCAR racing, is a bit much. Charlotte Motor Speedway has changed dramatically in the years since the first Superspeedway race here in the fall of 1960. But it must seem a bit eerie to these legendary brothers today. Here they are, preparing the familiar red, white, and blue number 21 Thunderbird with Neil Bonnet's name over the door for a young driver named Tommy Ellis, getting a chance because of a horrible accident several weeks earlier in Dover that left Bonnet unable to drive. Think back. In 1960, Curtis Turner was to have driven the Wood Brothers Ford at Charlotte in their first ever Superspeedway try. But at the last minute, he changed his mind.
Speedy Thompson took over, and he ran strong all day long, and was fortunate enough to win the race. And of course, that was our first major win, and naturally it was one of our favorites.
We won a new car and I don't know what all. And it sort of put me back on my feet because we was on our own. There was no help from Ford or anything at that time. And it made it so, I think the very next year I bought a new 61 Ford out of the showroom and made a race car out of it. The only one we ever did that way.
And the rest, as they say, is wonderful stock car racing folklore. From the days when Marvin Panch and then David Pearson dominated the circuit in a Wood Brothers machine to Bonnet today, it's a family business guaranteed to race on. We're next to Leonard and Glenn Wood now, taking more and more of an active role, is the next generation of Wood Brothers, Glenn's sons, Len and Eddie.
They used to help me all the time, you know. They was my two extra right hands, and so they more or less running the company right now, and they help me, and now I'm beginning to just help them.
But don't book space at the home for Leonard and Glenn Wood quite yet. They're still the brains behind one of the most respected racing teams in the industry. The brains, and just as often, the brawn.
Time to go, boys. You've been in there long enough.
Hey, we're not even tired. I feel good.
So I've checked the mileage, Andy.
Hey, we're the auto line. We're guaranteed.
Guaranteed.
I feel good. Yeah, 2 years no matter how far we go.
But no spark plug guarantees that.
We do. Yeah, we're the auto line.
But
So go pull the plug on somebody else.
monster maniacs just when you thought it was safe to turn on your VCR. United States Hot Rod Association blasts into your living room with the biggest, baddest, most awesome video spectacular ever. It's Monsters of Rock and Roar. Electrifying mega motor action like you've never seen before. You'll see it all. Slipping and sliding mud bog drag racing. Powerful truck pulling. Monster tank and truck battles. The ultimate showdown between Bigfoot and Barefoot. Wild stunts. High-flying supercross action. Funny car tug-of-wars and more. Meet Borean, the 200-mile-per-hour jet dragster that turns into a 2-story tall flame-throwing robot. Don't be fooled by imitations. Monsters of Rock and Roar is not available in stores. Order now before it's too late.
To order, call 1-800-257-0800. That's 1-800-257-0800. Or send check or money order for $19.95 plus $3.75 shipping to this address.
Saturday.
John Cowan and Tracy Nelson belt out the blues on the American Music Shop. Then on the Texas Connection, a rock and roller from the Texas Panhandle, Joe Ely, the American Music Shop and the Texas Connection. Saturday starting at 10 Eastern on TNN, the Nashville Network.
There was something about the Appalachian Mountains that seemed to have spawned the best stock car racing people back in the sport's infancy. Living on plain dirt roads with all those sharp corners may have had something to do with it. It was a lifestyle built on hard work and the handshake. They said you could see a man's integrity in his eye. Today, the Wood brothers still reflect that.
I think it just comes from their upracing. I think that they came out of that mountain area as gentlemen. They were raised a certain way, and I think that carries over into their business attitude. I think away from the racetrack, they're gentlemen, and when they walk in this garage area, you won't see them run around behind somebody trying to hire somebody out from another guy or trying to find out this or find out that. They're just gentlemen off the racetrack and on. They're just, it's a heck of a thing to say. They're just good people. That's the way they've always been.
The Wood brothers built their legacy in the mountains of Virginia in a tiny town named after the Swamp Fox, Civil War General Jeb Stuart. Here grew the Wood brothers on grounds near where they all still live today. Father, brothers, sons, and daughters. Here, the legend was born back in the Depression years, sons of a Stuart mechanic. 5 brothers took the racing from the start. Glenn, a wood chopper by trade, was the driver, and boy, could he burn up the pavement.
And was run a little short heat race earlier and collided with another car and bent the rear end housing. So I had to bring it home, and we was towing it home behind the new Oldsmobile. And being the housing bent, somehow it broke the axle. The whole axle came apart, let it down on the highway, and the sparks caught the gas tank afire.
And it burned up right in the middle of the road. And so they unhooked it, and after we cleaned up the mess, we brought it home. Then's when I started working on it. I helped clean it up, and we carried it to the next track, and he finished third.
And that was the beginning of one of the hottest racing teams in history. Glenn driving, and Leonard, 11 years younger, the mechanic, tore up the record book at Winston-Salem's Bowman Gray Stadium.
If it hadn't been for him, we would have probably never been racing. You know, naturally, he very early got real good at building engines and knowing what to do to a chassis. And him and I together knew what we wanted in a car, and we done real well in the early days with it.
NASCAR began in 1949, and the Wood brothers were right there, always in a Ford, because Fords were the only race car allowed to park in their backyard. And as NASCAR gained momentum, so did the Wood brothers, even through the tough times.
In 1959, I almost quit. I had been supported by the Ford factory team for 56 and 7, and they withdrew, And suddenly that left me with all of the bills, and it didn't pay any purses much back then either. And it was very hard. We didn't make much money, and you sort of, I guess by Leonard knowing what he knows about engines and all, and of course I was driving myself at the time, and naturally you didn't have to pay a driver, and that sort of was the way we survived.
The 60s christened 7 super speedway openings. When NASCAR left the dirt, Glenn decided the speed was too much for him. He stepped aside as the team's driver, but stayed on as team owner and manager. Now here come those ironies again. Remember Speedy Thompson, who filled in and won the 1960 Charlotte 400? Later that year, Thompson needed relief in Atlanta, and a fellow named Marvin Panch climbed in. He impressed the Wood brothers so much, they hired him to drive full-time. He and the Wood brothers reeled off 8 wins the next few years.
I can remember I drove for Glenn before Leonard got out of the service, and we were just another car out there, more or less. And when Leonard got out of the service, he started getting with the program, and then we just seemed to have a little edge on everybody else. He was real sharp. Matter of fact, he's the type of guy that can stand in the infield and watch you come through the corner, and he'd come in, he'd ask you a question or two, and he could tell what that car was doing.
2 weeks before the 1961 Daytona 500, Panch almost lost his life when the Maserati he was testing crashed and burst into flames. From his hospital bed, Panch asked the Wood brothers to let Dwayne Tiny Lunn, one of the 5 heroes who pulled him from the inferno, take his seat for the upcoming race. Lunn went on to win Glenn and Leonard's first Daytona 500. Rookie Cale Yarborough came next in the mid-60s.
They really gave me my big break. You know, they had one of the better teams in racing, and to be able to get in the Wood Brothers car, and I won an awful lot of races with them, and we were great friends, they're great people.
And what they did with a pit stop caused a revolution.
Turn up the music and turn down the lights.
Will she know how much I love her?
It's time for something special.
In the still
Heartland Music presents Country Nights. 40 of today's biggest hits in one great collection.
Here in the real world,
Alan Jackson.
It's not that easy at all.
Alabama.
When we make love.
40 of your favorite stars.
Our love is deeper than the holler.
Randy Travis.
Stronger than the river.
Ricky Van Shelton.
I'll leave this world loving you.
The Judds.
Why not be when the nights get cold? Why not be when you're broke?
Reba McEntire.
When whoever's in New England,
The heart and soul of today's country.
Let's fall to pieces.
From George Strait to Don Williams.
Just as long as I have you.
40 great songs. 4 big albums.
Don't close your eyes.
But Country Nights is not sold in stores.
Twinkle, twinkle, lucky star.
Please stay tuned to order.
To order, call toll-free 1-800-525-6600 to save all COD charges and pay only $19.98 for records or cassettes or $24.98 for 2 compact discs, plus $4 shipping. Use your credit card or send check or money order to Country Nights, P.O. Box 94040, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Remember to save all COD charges, send check or money order, or use your credit card.
Hero of today, I have to say that's someone like Dolly Parton, who is helping other people that she's grown up with, going back and helping them out any way she can, and always striving to do better. Well, family means to me a strong bonding. It's a unity. It's good times. It's fun. It's closeness. And I want my family, now that I have a child, to be like Mom and Daddy raised us. I think it's a great avenue for all the artists, new and old alike, and I think it's been a great shot in the arm for country music.
Check the stopwatch. In and out in 17 seconds flat. And hardly anyone blinks an eyelash anymore. But in the 50s and 60s, if you got your car in and out of the pits in less than 40 seconds, you were lightning quick. But that was before our hidden heroes, the Wood Brothers, made pit stops an art form.
That first race at Charlotte, you know, in 1960, we noticed the guys was taking like 46 seconds for a pit stop. And so we decided, you know, to start working at that, and it was about the time that Marvin Panch was driving for us in 1962 that we was down like to 25 seconds.
And I noticed I was beating everybody out of the pits. So I started telling some of the media about it. I said, you guys better watch it. He says, and then they started this timing thing and found out, hey, they are getting the car out quicker than anybody. No, they just directed me where to stop and to get in there as quick as possible and not to overshoot the pits and stop where they wanted you to stop. And they were good. They practiced and they were super good.
Those innovations along pit road became standard operating procedures. They invented a faster jack and a nut that would just slide off a wheel stud. Streamlined the gas flow. Soon fans stood and watched the Wood Brothers go, stopwatches in hand, cheering as the seconds flew by. They became so famous, Ford invited them to work the Jimmy Clark pit in the 1965 Indianapolis 500.
They figured around a minute it was going to take, and when we came in the first stop and, you know, made it in 17 seconds, they couldn't believe it, and kind of excited some. And then the next one, all we had to do was make fit the car, and then the next one was about 19 seconds, and I remember Chapman jumped over the wall, hugged every one of us' neck.
We did make, I think, one of the quickest complete race time in the pits that's been done yet. And I don't guess it'll ever be broken because they have to make like 5 pit stops. They can't carry as much fuel as they did then. So we only made 2 stops, didn't change a tire.
Jimmy Clark's win helped the Wood Brothers change the racing industry. Back on familiar turf with NASCAR, the Wood Brothers hired David Pearson, and together they reeled off 54 wins in the 70s, won a record 10 superspeedway races in 1973, and then did it again in 1976. Won an unprecedented 11 poles in 1974. And at the 1976 Daytona 500, Pearson and the Wood Brothers pulled off one of the most memorable last lap finishes in racing history.
Richard Petty goes back in front. They both spin. They're in the wall. Petty is sliding, slamming into the wall. He's coming down toward the finish line. Will he make it? He's still moving. The car stops 300, 400 feet shy of the finish line. Pearson is still running. Here's Petty trying to fire to come across the line. David Pearson moving down through as they come to the stripe. The winner is car number 21.
That was one of the most dramatic of Pearson's 43 victories with the Wood Brothers.
All I do is if I would run, and if I didn't win the race, I felt like, and it'd be my fault, because even on pit stops, if I was a little bit behind, I knew when I'd come in on a pit stop that they'd put me back out up front. So just everything worked like clockwork, and we were so confident. I guess that was one of the reasons we won so much.
NASCAR in the 70s. If you weren't running a car built by Junior Johnson, Bud Moore, Dale Inman, or the Wood Brothers, you might as well have been on horseback. And nowhere did the Wood Brothers and David Pearson dominate like Charlotte qualifying. They won 11 straight pole positions.
It just seemed like when David Pearson was driving for him, and when it come pole day, everybody's thinking about who's going to sit on the pole. I could just about tell them before they ever went out there who's going to sit on the pole.
And David had a style around that racetrack. It just fit the combination of the chassis and the motor. And it was just unreal what he could seem to do with the car.
I think when Neil Bonnet took over from the year after David was out of it, he came back and won a pole, too, and continued the streak. And after Neil got out of it, Buddy Baker got a pole there. So it's just something about the track. It fit whatever we was doing, I guess.
The first time at Charlotte, they said, well, they've sat on the pole here the last 4 years. It pays $50,000 to sit on the pole. Do you think you can do it? Well, I'm sitting there shaking in my shoes, and we go out to eat the night before qualifying. They said, don't worry about the qualifying. You know, we want to, don't worry, you ain't got to sit on the pole. You ain't got to do this. You ain't got to do that. We go out the next day, sit on the pole. The Wood Brothers race car sits on the pole. Somebody just aims it every year.
Pearson and the Wood brothers split as friends in 1979, paving the way for Bonnet to get his first shot at the big time. As Bonnet says today, it was a mixed blessing.
And it was like giving a kid that's been shooting a BB a 30-06. I got in the thing at Charlotte. I started back to back. I took the lead. The minute I took the lead, I let the thing get away from me, and I lost it. I had something that I physically couldn't handle. I won 40-something races out of 80 that year running short track, but I got in a missile that day, and it showed me how good the race cars they had. But not only that, it was probably the start of my career, but it was almost the end.
Bonnet would leave the Wood brothers for 6 seasons, and there were long, dry times for this legendary pair. But a time well spent grooming the next generation.
He was the first to break 260. He was the first to crack 280. He's two-time Top Fuel World Champion, Joe Amato. And whether he comes to smash the records or just go home with them, his spark plugs are always Autolite. He's not your average Joe, but then Autolite's not your average plug.
Feel free to hum along. The Civic hatchback from Honda.
You may have already heard about 1-900-FUN on TNN. You may have even been one of the thousands of callers who have dialed in to play our country music trivia game, or to join a fan club, or to enter one of our TNN sweepstakes for a chance to win valuable prizes. If you haven't already called 1-900-FUN on TNN, you might want to try it now. If you have, maybe it's time you call again. Each call costs 95 cents per minute.
65 years of the Grand Ole Opry.
During World War II, the Opry organized a series of celebrity tours, taking the music of America to our servicemen and women. The Camel Caravan, sponsored by the R.J. Reynolds Company, sent such stars as Red Foley, Minnie Pearl, and Roy Acuff to stateside military training camps. They introduced country music to thousands of troops from the North and East who'd never heard it before.
Tune in CBS TV January 19th for the 65th anniversary of the Grand Ole Opry.
It's Charlotte Motor Speedway where much of the Wood brothers legend was built. 11 straight pole positions. 3 victories, all by the man known as the Silver Fox, David Pearson. But those were the 70s, and the Wood brothers and Pearson had long since parted ways. Or had they? It's 1989, and here they stood again, a little older perhaps, but together again. Neil Bonnet's accident several weeks before at Dover had left the number 21 driverless for Charlotte. They asked Pearson if he'd like to try just this once, for old time's sake.
It almost seemed like the time was never there, the separation. It was just the same as we'd come to practice the next day, it seemed like. It was so real. It just unbelievable how it felt.
But unrealistic, as it turned out.
I had trouble with my back here on Wednesday when I tested the car. We ran real good, and but the next morning when I woke up, it was killing me, which is hurting me right now a little bit. But I knew that I couldn't go out and do the car justice.
So the Wood brothers, the whole family of them, gave the chance to young Tommy Ellis, as they had given such moments to other rising stars over the years. But this time it was a decision made not just by Leonard and Glenn, but by Eddie and Len too. This has always been a family affair and won't stop anytime soon. Everything they have built comes directly from the hills of Stuart, Virginia. Those few acres on which they live side by side right next to the house they grew up in. Even Kim, when she married, they hired her husband to drive the truck and work the pit. She took over her mother's duties, making the travel plans, balancing the books, and making an old-fashioned country lunch for the team. She did put her foot down, though, just once, gently.
I did get my honeymoon, because I didn't really want to go to a racetrack on the honeymoon. All the rest of this family did.
But there she is, bright and smiling in the Wood Brothers pit, as much a part of it as her father and uncle, and her brothers who represent the next generation, each following the footsteps almost perfectly.
We still do things the way they did, and try to conduct ourselves in whatever we do like they did, and, you know, they did a pretty good job with it. Daddy and Leonard have been in it for 39 years. I don't think I'm going to last 39. I'll be wore out. I don't know how they ever done it, and are still doing it.
With the smiles of contented men, they watched yet another Charlotte race unwind. The Thunderbird was never a factor this time, but they know there will be a next year. The Wood brothers have survived and met the challenges with the growth of NASCAR. From its early beginnings in the red clay bull rings to the prestigious Winston Cup Series, they've built drivers' careers and forced other teams to perform at a much higher level. Well, that legacy continues on pit road with the next generation of Wood brothers. That's Glenn's sons, Len and Eddie.
I think the Woods run on pride. The fact that they've been in the sport so long, they've won so many races, I think they almost feel like they got to win again. And I'm telling you, I want to be a part of that. They're going to win some more races at Winston Cup Racing. Eddie and Len are coming along. Leonard is as smart and as knowledgeable guys I've ever dealt with a car from bumper to bumper. And I think the pride that's within those people of winning races is going to make them win a lot more before they quit.
For Hidden Heroes, I'm Dave Bowman. Next week on Hidden Heroes, follow funny car driver Bruce Larson and his crew chief, Maynard Yinks, through the trials and victories of their championship season.
This episode of Hidden Heroes has been brought to you by Fram Filters, Bendix Brakes, and Autolite spark plugs and wiring cables, which are all quality products of Allied Signal.